They say a mother's love knows no bounds, that it transcends reason, morality, even sanity itself. I used to believe that was beautiful. I used to believe love was pure. But after what I witnessed in my sister's bedroom that night, I learned the terrible truth. Some loves are born in darkness, and some mothers give birth to things that should never have drawn breath in this world. Welcome to a place where nightmares wear familiar faces, where the bonds of blood run deeper and darker than you ever imagined, and where the greatest horror isn't what lurks in the shadows, but what we're willing to protect. When it steps into the light, I remember the exact moment everything changed. Though at the time I didn't recognize it for what it was, the beginning of the end, the first crack in reality that would eventually split our world apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late spring when my sister Constance sat at our family dinner table and announced, with a strange mixture of defiance and serenity, that she was 4 months pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything they touched. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face went from red to white to red again, cycling through shades of rage and shock. And I just stared at my little sister, at sweet, shy Constance, who still slept with a stuffed rabbit and who had never so much as held hands with a boy, and felt the world tilt beneath me. The fury that followed was biblical. My father's voice shook the walls as he demanded to know who had done this, who had touched his daughter, who would pay for this transgression. My mother wept and pleaded, her hands reaching across the table as if she could somehow pull the truth from Constance's lips through sheer maternal desperation. But Constance just sat there, her hands folded over her barely visible bump, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth like she was listening to music only she could hear. She wouldn't tell, not then, not ever. The silence she wrapped around the father's identity was absolute, impenetrable, maddening. It was the kind of silence that breeds speculation, that turns neighbors into detectives and friends into gossips, that transforms a small town into a churning machine of rumor and accusation. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs earlier. I should have noticed the way Constance had started wearing my father's old flannel shirts, drowning her slender frame in fabric that hung off her like curtains. I should have questioned her sudden appetite, the way she'd started eating strange combinations of food at odd hours. Pickles with ice cream was one thing, but raw hamburger meat with honey, cold chicken straight from the fridge at 3 in the morning. I should have wondered about the new the way she'd started locking her bedroom door and spending hours in there doing God knows what. The way she'd flinch and cover her stomach whenever anyone came near her, as though protecting something precious and fragile from the world's harsh gaze. But I didn't see it. None of us did, because this was Constance. After all, Constance the obedient, Constance the proper, Constance who apologized when other people bumped into her, and who had never, in her 17 years of life, caused our parents a single moment of real trouble. Until now. It was a few days after the initial revelation that I found myself sitting on the edge of Constance's bed, watching her fold tiny clothes she'd bought from the thrift store, little onesies with dinosaurs and trucks on them, soft cotton blankets in shades of blue and green. The domesticity of it all made my head spin. This was really happening. My little sister was going to be a mother. I had to try one more time. I had to understand. Connie, I said, my voice gentle but firm, you have to tell someone who the father is. If someone hurt you, if someone took advantage of you. But she cut me off with a laugh. Bright and genuine. That made me feel like I'd said something absurd. Oh, Emily, she said, shaking her head. It wasn't like that at all. You don't understand. And I didn't. I really didn't. But I thought you didn't even like boys. I pressed, unable to keep the confusion out of my voice. Constance had never shown interest in dating. Had turned down every awkward advance from the boys in her grade, with a polite but firm disinterest that bordered on repulsion. She wrinkled her nose at my words, that familiar expression of distaste crossing her features. I don't, she said emphatically. And then, and I'll never forget this, her expression shifted into something I'd never seen before. Something almost sly, almost knowing, but I wouldn't exactly call them a boy. The way she said them made my skin crawl. Not him, them. What did that mean? Before I could process it, before I could even begin to formulate my next question, Constance added with that same strange smile. Besides, how old is this guy? I asked, my voice taking on the stern edge I usually reserved for her when she tried to skip homework. Her smile faded slightly, and she began to wring her hands in that nervous gesture I knew so well. I don't know, she admitted, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Pretty old, I think. The casual way she said it, the uncertainty mixed with acceptance, sent alarm bells ringing through my head. You think, I repeated, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. Connie, who is this person? How old are we talking? 20? 30? You need to, but I never got to finish that sentence. No, the word exploded from Constance, with such sudden violence that I physically jerked backward. In all our years together, through all our sisterly squabbles and teenage drama, I had never heard Constance yell like that, with such raw desperation, such fierce protection. She grabbed my hands, her fingers digging into my skin with surprising strength, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Emily, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't ask me that. Please." I swore I'd never tell. I promised. I pulled my hands away, anger rising in my throat like bile. The protective fury that had been building in me since she first made her announcement finally found its outlet. "Connie, if you're protecting some creep who got you pregnant, some predator who..." But she laughed again. That same bright, genuine laugh that seemed so terribly out of place. I didn't see what was so funny. There was nothing funny about any of this. "It's not like that," she insisted, her giggles finally subsiding into that dreamy, distant expression I was beginning to dread. She stared off into the middle distance, past my shoulder, looking at something I couldn't see. "It's like, have you ever had a secret that you didn't want to tell anyone because telling would make it less special, less yours?" I nodded slowly, though truthfully, I couldn't think of a single secret I'd ever had that I didn't eventually want to share. Wasn't half the joy of a secret in the telling of it, in that delicious moment of revelation. But Constance continued, lost in her own world. "This belongs to me, and I don't want to share it with anybody, not even you, Em. Especially not you. Because if I let the words out into the world, then it becomes real in a different way. Then it becomes something people can judge and question and ruin, and I won't let that happen. I won't let anyone ruin this." The possessiveness in her voice, the fierce territoriality, should have warned me, should have told me that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. But I was too busy being hurt, too caught up in my own feelings of betrayal and exclusion to recognize the warning signs. The months that followed were a special kind of hell. In a small town like ours, secrets have a half-life measured in hours, not days. Within a week, everyone knew. Within 2 weeks, everyone had a theory. The speculation was relentless, cruel, and increasingly absurd. The boys in Constance's class found themselves under scrutiny. Their every past interaction with her, analyzed and reinterpreted through this new, scandalous lens. Her teachers faced whispered accusations in grocery store aisles, and knowing looks at parent-teacher conferences. Even Dr. Morrison, our family physician, who'd known Constance since she was born, found his name dragged through the mud by people desperate for someone to blame, someone to point at and say, there's the monster. But the worst rumor, the one that made my blood boil and my hands clench into fists, was the whisper that it was my father. That Constance's silence was protecting not some outsider, but someone much closer to home. That the reason she wouldn't speak was because the truth was too horrible, too taboo to be voiced. When I heard that particular piece of venom, tracked it back to its source, a pimply little sophomore named Derek Hutchins, who I'd seen Constance turn down for a date last year, I made sure he understood that words have consequences. My fist connecting with his face felt righteous and pure. Even if it did earn me a week's suspension, and him a split lip, he'd carry the scar for years to come. Worth a dot at home. The tension was suffocating. Dinner became a silent ritual of avoidance, with my parents refusing to even look at Constance. As if by not acknowledging her presence, they could somehow make the whole situation disappear. They ate with their eyes fixed on their plates, mechanically moving food from plate to mouth, while the silence pressed down on us like a physical weight. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them, and make them see that their daughter needed them now more than ever. That their shame and disappointment were luxuries we couldn't afford. But I didn't. I just gritted my teeth and tried to be there for Constance in the ways they couldn't. Wouldn't. What surprised me most, though what still haunts me in its strange way, was how utterly unbothered Constance seemed by all of it. Where every whispered insult, every pointed stare, every cruel joke made me want to lash out and defend her, Constance just glided through her days, as if none of it could touch her. She held her head high, her back straight, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. She smiled at the people who gossiped about her. She thanked the teachers who could barely hide their disgust. She existed in a bubble of serene certainty that nothing, not shame or judgment or social exile, could penetrate. And strangest of all, she glowed. That's the only word for it. Despite everything, the stress, the isolation, the judgment. Constance seemed to radiate happiness from somewhere deep inside. Her skin took on a luminous quality. Her eyes sparkled. She moved with a grace and confidence I'd never seen in her before. It was as if pregnancy had unlocked some secret part of her, revealed a Constance that had always been hiding beneath the shy, obedient exterior. I loved her for it. I loved her strength, her certainty, her absolute refusal to be ashamed of what was happening to her body. In those months, watching my sister transform, I had never loved her more. Asterisk, when James was born on a cold Tuesday in January, I rushed to the hospital the moment my mother called, my heart pounding with an excitement I couldn't fully name. I burst into Constance's room to find her propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty and absolutely radiant, cradling a tiny, wrinkled form against her chest. My nephew. James, the name suited him. Somehow solid, dependable, normal. Constance didn't look up when I entered, so transfixed was she by the small life in her arms. I approached slowly, reverently, feeling like I was witnessing something sacred. When I finally got close enough to see him properly, I was struck by how ordinary he looked. A normal baby, pink and wrinkled and small, with tiny fists that waved aimlessly and a little rosebud mouth that opened and closed as if practicing the mechanics of crying. He was perfect. Completely, utterly perfect. James, Constance whispered, finally looking up at me, and I saw that her eyes were filmed with tears. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears, tears of a love so profound it threatened to spill out of her and flood the room. The lump that rose in my own throat took me by surprise, and suddenly we were both crying and laughing, reaching for each other's hands. Locked in a moment of joy, so bright and pure, it felt like it would last forever. Like nothing could ever touch us again. Like we were invincible. We weren't. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 weeks later. At James' follow-up appointment, the pediatrician, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, frowned slightly as she examined the measurements, then frowned deeper as she checked them again. He's lost weight, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral but not quite succeeding. About 200 grams since birth. Constance, who'd been smiling and cooing at James throughout the examination, went very still. But he's been eating, she said, confusion creeping into her voice. I feed him every 2 hours, just like you said. He takes the bottle fine. He doesn't spit up much. I don't understand. Neither did Dr. Chen. Apparently, she ordered tests, blood work, metabolic panels, screens for cystic fibrosis, for celiac disease, for diabetes and thyroid disorders, and a dozen other conditions with names I couldn't pronounce and didn't want to understand. Failure to thrive, she called it. And those 3 words hung over us like a curse. Over the next weeks, I accompanied Constance to what felt like an endless parade of medical appointments. We sat in waiting rooms with other worried parents, their children crying or sleeping or playing with worn-out toys. All of us trapped in this limbo of medical uncertainty. We listened to specialists speak in hushed, careful tones about caloric retention and metabolic demands, about ruling out conditions one by one, and with each appointment, each test, each sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful consultation, I watched my sister diminish. Asterisk, it wasn't just worry. Though God knows, she had reason enough for that. It was something else. Something deeper and more disturbing. As James lost weight, and he continued to lose weight, dropping first to 6 pounds, then 5.5. His tiny body seeming to consume itself from the inside out. Constance seemed to fade along with him. She became absent-minded and vague, forgetting tasks halfway through. I'd find her standing in the kitchen with the fridge door open, staring at its contents with a puzzled expression, as if she'd forgotten why she'd opened it in the first place. She'd start sentences and trail off mid-thought, her eyes glazing over as she stared at nothing. The confident, glowing woman who'd breezed through her pregnancy was being replaced by something else. Something hollow and haunted and increasingly disconnected from reality. She drew in on herself, becoming smaller, quieter, less present with each passing day, and I couldn't reach her. God knows I tried. I'd sit with her for hours, holding James so she could rest, trying to draw her into conversation, attempting to pull her back from whatever dark place she was sinking into, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. She was there but not there, present but absent, and with each day the distance between us grew, until I felt like I was losing both of them, the nephew I'd only just gained and the sister I'd had my whole life. Asterisk, all the tests came back negative. One by one, the possibilities were eliminated. Not cystic fibrosis, not diabetes, not any metabolic disorder they could identify. James was, according to every test modern medicine could throw at him, perfectly healthy, and yet, he was dying, slowly but surely, wasting away despite eating normally, Despite showing no signs of any identifiable disease, the relief that flickered across Constance's face with each negative result was always quickly swallowed by a deeper anxiety. A growing desperation that made her eyes wild and her movements jerky. If it wasn't any of those things, then what was it? What was wrong with her baby? What was killing him? I didn't have an answer. Nobody did. I'm not sure what woke me that night. Some sound, perhaps. Or maybe just that primal instinct that tells you something is wrong, even when your conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. I lay there in the darkness of my room, staring at the ceiling, feeling a dread creep up from my belly to my chest. A weight pressing down on me that made breathing difficult. That's when I noticed the light, a sickly yellow glow, seeping in under my bedroom door, like something liquid and wrong. I glanced at my alarm clock, 2:15 a.m. Too late for my parents, who were early to-bed people. Too early for Constance, who was usually up with James at 4 or 5 for his feeding. Something was off. Reluctantly, I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with sleep and something else. A reluctance I couldn't quite name. As if some part of me knew that whatever I was about to discover would change everything. I opened my door and saw that the light was coming from the kitchen. The fridge door was hanging open, humming its mechanical hum into the silence of the house. I shuffled toward it, grumbling to myself about wasted electricity and thoughtlessness. And that's when I noticed the state of the fridge's interior. The contents looked like they'd been ransacked, packages torn open, containers knocked over, their contents spilling and mixing in the bottom drawer. It looked like someone had been searching for something desperately, frantically, without caring about the mess they left behind. I closed the fridge door and was about to head back to my room when I heard it. A soft sound coming from Constance's room. A voice, her voice, but pitched low, barely audible, speaking in a rapid whisper that sent chills down my spine. There was something in that tone, some quality I couldn't quite identify, but that made every instinct in me scream danger. I moved toward her door, my heart pounding, my mouth suddenly dry. "Connie," I called out softly, but got no response. Just that continued whispering, urgent and pleading and wrong. I opened the door. The room was dark, lit only by the ambient glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. I could make out Constance's silhouette, bent over James' crib, her body curved in an unnatural position, her hands doing something I couldn't quite see. The whispering continued, and now I could make out fragments. "Please, please, you have to eat. Please, just try it. Please." My hand found the light switch. The sudden brightness made us both flinch. Constance straightened up and turned to face me, blinking against the light. And what I saw in her face made me take an involuntary step backward. This wasn't my sister, or rather, it was her, but transformed. Her eyes were bloodshot and ringed with dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. Her skin had a waxy, unhealthy pallor, but it was the expression in those strained, desperate eyes that truly frightened me. A look I'd never seen before. Feral and trapped and fierce, like a wild animal caught in a corner with no way out. For a moment, she looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like I was a threat. Then something in her expression shifted, and she was Constance again, but a Constance pushed to some terrible edge. "He won't eat," she said, her voice cracking with desperation. "Emily, I don't know what he eats. I've tried everything. I've tried formula and milk," and that's when my eyes dropped to her hands, and my brain struggled to process what it was seeing. She was holding something, clutching it tightly against her chest, and that something was dripping. Dark red drops fell onto the carpet, one after another, steady as a heartbeat. A raw steak, a thick, bloody piece of meat that looked like it had been torn from its packaging with bare hands. The incongruity of it short-circuited my brain for a moment. Why was Constance holding raw meat? Why was she in James' room at 2 a.m. with a bloody steak in her hands? What had she been doing before I turned on the light? The questions piled up faster than I could process them. And underneath it all was a growing horror I couldn't quite articulate. A sense that I was seeing something I shouldn't, witnessing something that broke fundamental rules about how the world was supposed to work. I forced myself to move, to approach her slowly, making soothing sounds like you would to a frightened animal. "Connie," I murmured, keeping my voice soft and numb. It's okay, it's okay." When I reached her, I took her hands, cold and trembling violently, in my own and gently pried the meat from her grasp, setting it on the changing table. I glanced into the crib. James was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, looking peaceful and normal and completely oblivious to whatever had been happening in the darkness before I arrived. I guided Constance back to her bed, helping her lie down, pulling the covers up over her shaking body. She began to cry then, soft, helpless sobs that shook her thin frame. "I don't know what he eats," she whimpered between sobs. "I don't know what he eats." I sat on the edge of her bed and stroked her hair, running my fingers through the long, dark strands until her breathing evened out and she finally fell asleep. Even then, I didn't move. I sat there in the dim light, listening to James breathing from the crib and Constance's deeper, exhausted breaths from the bed, and tried to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I couldn't. It made no sense. None of this made any sense. Asterisk. The uneasiness from that night clung to me like a second skin through the next day. It was Saturday, and my friends wanted to go to the movies, but I cancelled. My parents were both away for the weekend. Some combination of grocery shopping and errands that would keep them occupied for hours, and the thought of leaving Constance alone in the house with James made my stomach clench with anxiety. I couldn't explain why, even to myself. What did I think was going to happen? But I couldn't shake that image of her standing over the crib in the darkness, clutching that raw meat, whispering desperately to her infant son. So I stayed. I drifted through the house, unable to settle on any activity for more than a few minutes. I'd start a book, then put it down after a page. I'd turn on the TV, then turn it off again. Mostly, I found myself hovering around Constance, watching her with a critical eye. I couldn't quite turn off. She seemed ... normal. That was the unsettling part. She changed James' diaper with practiced efficiency. She bathed him in the little plastic tub we'd set up in the bathroom, supporting his head carefully, washing him with gentle strokes. She fed him his formula, holding the bottle at the right angle, burping him afterward. She even played with him on the living room floor, tickling his feet and blowing raspberries on his concave belly, making exaggerated funny faces that coaxed tiny, reflexive smiles from him. Asterisk. To anyone watching, she looked like a devoted young mother, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen. And the more I watched her, the more I noticed the little things, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the mechanical quality of her movements, as if she was going through the motions of motherhood without fully inhabiting the role. There was something performed about it all, something not quite right, though I couldn't have explained what or why if you'd asked me. And her eyes, God, her eyes, red-rimmed from exhaustion, yes, but there was something else behind them, a desperation, a knowledge, a fear. Asterisk. That night, my sleep was troubled by nightmares I couldn't quite remember upon waking, just fragments of images, feelings of wrongness and dread, the sense of something dark approaching. I'd wake with a gasp, my heart pounding, then drift back into uneasy sleep, only to be pulled under by another wave of disturbing dreams. So when James' cry pierced the night, I was already halfway out of bed before my conscious mind had fully registered the sound. But these cries were different from his usual fussing. They were louder, more desperate, and there was a quality to them I'd never heard before, a wetness, as if he was choking or drowning, as if something was wrong with his throat or lungs. I threw myself out of bed and ran down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought it might break through. I didn't bother with the light switch. I just charged through Constance's door in the darkness, calling out, "Connie, what's wrong?" I heard asterisk, a startled cry from Constance, the sound of something metal clattering to the floor, and then, in the dim light from the window, I saw it, a kitchen knife, lying on the floor between us, the blade stained with something dark that looked black in the shadows. "What? My voice came out as barely a whisper. "What have you done?" I took a step toward Constance, saw her standing frozen by the crib, her hands raised in front of her, as if to ward me off, or perhaps to plead with me. But I couldn't look at her. My eyes were drawn inexorably to the crib, to James, to the sound of his crying which had suddenly, abruptly stopped. Please, I thought, please let him be okay. Please let this be something I'm misunderstanding. Please, please, please. I looked into the crib. Asterisk, there was a red line running down James' tiny body, starting at the base of his throat, running down his chest, past his belly button, down to where his diaper began. A jagged, irregular line that as I watched, began to gape open like a mouth, spreading wider, the flesh parting to reveal the red, glistening interior. I could see his ribs, or what I thought were his ribs, white fragments of bone protruding from the torn flesh. "Oh my God, Connie," I heard myself saying from very far away. "Oh my God, what have you done?" The words came out mechanical, distant, as if someone else was speaking through me. I gripped the side of the crib to keep myself from falling as waves of nausea crashed over me. The room spun, my vision blurred, but I couldn't look away, couldn't close my eyes. couldn't do anything but stare at my nephew's destroyed body and try to make my brain accept what my eyes were showing me. Asterisk, time stretched and warped. Seconds felt like hours. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps that didn't seem to bring any oxygen, my heart pounding a sick rhythm against my ribs. Gradually, slowly, my vision began to clear. The shapes in the crib resolved into greater detail, and that's when I realized those weren't ribs. The white fragments I'd taken for bone, for the shattered remains of his ribcage, weren't bones at all. They were teeth, great, jagged teeth, yellowed and crooked, set in a mouth that ran lengthwise down James' body. A terrible sideways grin full of predatory hardware that no infant, no human, should possess. My mind reeled, trying to reject what I was seeing, trying to find some rational explanation. A birth defect, a tumor, a trick of the light, anything but what this actually was. The mouth gaped wider, impossibly wide, the jaw unhinging like a snake's. And from somewhere deep within that gaping maw, something moved, a tongue, but not a human tongue. This was thick and black and glistening with some viscous fluid that dripped and pooled in the bottom of the mouth. It emerged slowly, questing, tasting the air with purposeful movements that spoke of intelligence and hunger. Asterisk, I stumbled backward, a strangled sound escaping my throat that was neither scream nor cry but something in between. The tongue continued to rise, longer than should have been possible, longer than James' entire body, extending up and out of the crib like some terrible serpent. It waved back and forth, questing, searching, and then, oh God, it found the changing table. That's when I saw the rat, a large brown rat, fuzzy and inert, lying on the changing table's surface. Its head had been crudely removed, leaving a ragged stump of neck. The tongue approached it with horrible deliberation, the tip touching the rat's body, exploring it. And then, with a deftness that made my stomach heave, it wrapped around the rodent's body and lifted it, pulling it back toward the crib, toward that waiting, terrible mouth. The tongue made wet, slurping sounds as it retreated, pulling its prize back into the darkness of that impossible throat. And I heard, God help me, I heard the crunch of small bones being crushed by those jagged teeth. Asterisk, oh, the sound came from behind me, small and breathless. Constance. I'd forgotten she was there. I turned, moving like I was underwater, my body heavy and unresponsive. Constance stood with her hands clasped together so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes fixed on the crib with an expression I couldn't read. There was no horror in her face, no fear, no disgust. Her eyes, those red-rimmed, exhausted eyes, glittered in the dim light with something else entirely. Wonder, awe, love. Asterisk, oh, Emily. She breathed, and then she smiled, actually smiled, a radiant, proud, maternal smile that belonged on the face of any new mother, showing off her perfect baby. Her voice was full of rapturous joy as she whispered the words that would echo in my nightmares for years to come. He looks just like his father. Ending. They say a mother knows her child better than anyone. That maternal instinct is the deepest, truest knowledge that exists in this world. And, I suppose, in her own terrible way, Constance did know her son. Knew what he was, knew what he needed. Knew the truth that the rest of us couldn't see, that some children come into this world hungry for things that don't exist in any pediatrician's feeding chart, craving sustenance that no formula can provide. I never found out what happened to Constance and James after that night. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran from that room, from that house, and I didn't stop until I was 3 towns over, staying with a friend who asked no questions when I showed up at her door at 4 in the morning, shaking and incoherent. They say the house still stands empty now, though no one seems to remember exactly when Constance and the baby left, or where they went. The town's collective memory about the whole affair has become strangely fuzzy, as if everyone has agreed to forget, to let the details blur and fade, until all that's left is a vague story about a troubled young girl who got pregnant and moved away. But sometimes, late at night, I think about what Constance said, about James looking just like his father. And I wonder what kind of thing could sire a child like that. What kind of being Constance met in whatever dark place their paths crossed. What kind of love could exist between a human girl and something that wears a mouth full of teeth where its heart should be. The doctors called it failure to thrive, but they were wrong. James wasn't failing to thrive. He was just hungry for the wrong things. And somewhere out there, I think he's still feeding, still growing, still looking more and more like his father every day. And God help us all if he ever decides he's had enough rat.